Yo, we're shaking, we're shaking, we're shaking. I got a special episode today. Shout out to all you Knicks fans. I appreciate the Knicks fans that's tuning in, that's coming in faster. Appreciate y'all, man. Shout out to the New York Knicks organization for starting off great this preseason, man. 3-0. I'm proud of them. We also got a game later on today, but today I just so happened to get a very special guy in here on my platform, and I appreciate him for throwing this dog a nice bone, right? But let me bring this wonderful gentleman in here. I got my guy Scoop B in the building. Scoop, man, I appreciate you for giving me the time of day, man. I know you're a busy man. One and two, I know you're doing a lot of things. I see you interviewing a lot of people, so thank you, man. I appreciate that so much, man. Thank you, man.
Busy but accessible, brother. Thank you so much for having me.
Anytime, man. Anytime. Let's get right into it, Scoop. Scoop, where
Me.
you started? Where you from? Where it started from, man? Where's all of this? Scoop B, where you from? How it started? It got to be a point in your life where you're like, hey, I want to be this reporter. I want to be this guy. So I would like to know, where did it start from?
I was born in New Jersey, but split time between states, split time between Essex County, New Jersey, as well as Harlem. My dad's from Jersey City. My mom is from Harlem. My parents divorced when I was 3. And, spent much of my time of my formative years in Harlem. Actually, family ran and operated 2 shoe stores on 125th Street in Harlem, the Athlete's Foot and Men's Walkers. Men's Walkers was right across the street from Lily's Lounge. It's now a Whole Foods. And so, my early foundations of just basketball were spent, ringing a cash register at 6 years old at the sneaker store, the Athlete's Foot, and seeing sneaker releases with the Dominique Wilkins of the world, the Spud Webbs, Akeem Olajuwon, and then my uncle actually ran a basketball league at Riverbank State Park called Citywide. He was the commissioner of that basketball league, so I used to go to work with him, and would be around the late Ernie Lorch and Leroy Hendricks and some of those other guys, and you'd see the Stephon Marburys, the Kenny Andersons, the Rod Stricklands, the Drederick Irvings, all the Bernard Kings, all those guys came up and out of Citywide, and I saw my uncle just doing his thing, whether it was marketing and opportunities and things like that with the Sprite Junior Knicks League, and I said, man, I want to be a part of this. And I think the icing on the cake came watching the NBA on NBC back in 1991 when Michael and the Bulls won their first championship, and an audition that changed my life at Chelsea Pier, where I was auditioning to host a kids radio show with the New Jersey Nets. Changed my life, and I'm standing up here with you now, years later, still reflecting on that time, and still working in the field and living, trying to live my best life.
When it comes to going into that field as a black man, did people ever doubt you, or you ever felt slighted? Because obviously, in this day and age, it's kind of harder for us to get certain opportunities, but we work our butts off, right? Do you feel like, as a black man, you felt slighted on the come up trying to get the way you need to be? Do you feel like you had certain disadvantages because, in the work field and in the workplace and in those kind of important places, sometimes we're starting off on the back foot, but we got to put in extra work?
I think so. There's a duality to that question. I think at this point in my life now, yes, but starting out, no. Starting off doing kids radio for the Nets as a 12-year-old kid, you have your parents who come with you to games, and you're in the locker room and you're interviewing players, you're sharing spaces with Woj when he first started, covering the Nets for the Bergen Record, Chris Broussard at the New York Times covering the Nets of the Knicks, being around Stephen A. when he was the Inquirer covering the Sixers. So I'm in the scrum with all these older reporters, for Herbert, the New York Post. I think early on I was protected. I think, graduating grad school and living in your grandmother's basement and building your career that way after school, you do see those things that are unfair, and I think I've seen it from both lenses. I think starting young was a blessing because you saw the field. I think graduating college and um, going into the field and freelancing at 12 different publications, and then being around some of your peers and seeing editors' points of views that may not align with yours, or other peers of yours who that may even look like you, that have issues with you and don't understand you and you don't understand them. I think that's where you see the level of inequality or just doubting. But I think the way you combat that is not looking for validation. I think you validate yourself, and I think you just keep doing the work. And I am a firm believer in this. Your talent will find you if you put in the work, and I really do believe that. I continue to preach that to other people, and but you always have to be better, not just amongst people who don't look like you, but amongst your peers as well, and also try to lift a hand and help people who look like you, who don't look like you, and who aspire to be you if you can at the same time.
When it comes to media, is there certain kinds of media? Because there's certain kind of journalism, right? It's certain kind of writing, right? Is there certain different kinds of media? If there is, can you explain some of those, please?
If I'm understanding your question right, you're asking me, um, is there landscapes for different kind of media, and is there?
Yeah, yeah. Basically, like, is there a certain genre for certain kind of media? Because it's all different. When you're writing, you're writing different poems, right? It's a haiku. You're not. You get what I'm saying?
I tell you what, I remember when I was an undergrad, and Chris Broussard was working at ESPN at the time. He took me with him uh, for like a weekend to go, like, just to get a tour of the campus. And I was supposed to be trailing him for a project I was working on when I was in college. And he was just giving me so much advice, and just talking, like we rode down to Bristol, Connecticut together, or up to Bristol, Connecticut together. And one of the things that he said that he stuck with, that stuck with me to this day, is write how you talk and write how you write. Don't write how you assume you want people to hear you talk. And to me, that was so significant, because to me, that is establishing your own voice. That is speaking in a way that, even if people don't understand the way you talk, they're going to learn it, and you're going to establish who you are, and not just try to be who you people want you to be. And so I think that has carried me. I told you that at a point I freelanced in about 10 to 12 different publications at a time. And I entered every space being Brandon or being Scoop, or like, I think for me, I've written at Black publications, whether that be Ebony, Jet, I've Vibe, the Source magazine, and I've also written at traditional media, whether that is Bally Sports, whether that is working at CBS Sports Radio, and doing TV commentary as well as written work. And I think you just adjust accordingly. Like, I had this conversation with a very close friend of mine last night who's in a totally different field. And I talked about how significant Ray for Austin being able to adjust to both the street ball game and the NBA game is so significant, because you have to constantly code switch and in your mind process the difference between rules in both games. And I think you can apply that subset to life, whether that's in the corporate space, whether that is in the media space, whether that is in politics and more. But when you find a way to establish who you are while still adjusting to those cultural norms or cultural nuances within an industry, I think that makes you very valuable.
When you say freelance, because I heard you say that a couple of times. Explain freelancing in the media world for people that don't know, because me myself, right now I'm writing Substack articles, right? It's free. You could go read them whenever you want, right?
Right.
What's your explanation of like freelancing, and what's
Um,
your suggestions for people who want to get into that field?
so freelancing for me was specifically, okay, I graduated grad school in 2011 from Hofstra University. Was living in my grandmother's basement from 2011 to about 2016. And at the time, when I first graduated, first of all, I was an adjunct professor at a couple different colleges, teaching writing, teaching English. But in addition to that, I was also writing per article, for hire. So Vibe would pay me a certain amount of money to write a feature piece on Carmelo Anthony or write a feature piece on Isaiah Thomas. At the time, Isaiah Thomas was going through that whole front office hiring. He was being hired by the Liberty, and so reached out to Isaiah, wrote a piece. Reached out to Melo, wrote a piece on just his elevation. So you get a one off. They pay you anywhere from $300 to $1,500 to write an article. You turn it in and it's published, rather than you being on staff at a publication. That I was doing that for a period of time before I started progressing as a grown up in the space, and paid per article. I went from that to working for free at the Source magazine, and then getting my writing clips up and presenting to other places. There was an opportunity at the time. Jabril Peppers, who was in high school at the time. I had been working locally at the East Orange Record newspaper and the West Orange Chronicle newspaper, both in New Jersey, and wrote pieces about Jabril Peppers on that side and wrote pieces about Kyrie Irving on the West Orange Chronicle side. Both publications couldn't get in contact with them. And so what I did was I used those clips locally to pitch to maxpreps.com, who I wrote 2 feature pieces on Jabril's decision to go to the University of Michigan, and then ultimately with Kyrie, a local grassroots basketball camp turned into a longer form relationship, with him and his family and more, and continued for some years. So it started grassroots. I believe that before you become you take your talent to the world, you become a master of your local area, and then your talent will find you based upon the work that you put in. So freelancing was per piece being paid, and then along the way, being at CBS Radio for a period of time and being a columnist there, hosting a podcast, being on, being an expert on CBS This Morning, and then taking that and then going to different places, and ultimately just using your clips and building your name and your reputation, and getting into those positions as a staff writer, or as an NBA analyst, or as a senior writer, or all those different things. It comes with time, and it starts on the grassroots as a freelancer in my case.
So, yo, that's a great explanation. I appreciate that, Scoop.
Mm-hmm.
And when it comes to like freelancing and you wanting to be a part of the media, it's also the way that you carry yourself. So a person like me, I've matured over the years as far as like responding to certain people, staying away from certain stuff. How do you avoid when people, because I see some comments sometimes, and I see you look at them like, yo, I know this guy didn't just say that to me, but how do you avoid that type of negative replies and stuff of that nature, and try to stay focused on what you're doing, because negativity is everywhere in the media? How do you avoid that type of stuff? And do you have an example of a situation where you had to literally like catch yourself like, hey, wait, hold on, you know what? Wait, let me step away from my phone real quick.
So I think, again, being myself, I think, somebody says something to you on the internet, you read it, and you have a decision to make, whether you want to reply or how you want to reply. I like to laugh, I like to joke, I like to play, but I also like to work hard. And I think my style and how I reply, um, is you can relate to this, is very it's very Harlem of me how I reply to certain people.
Put
And so
off
I think
fish.
but hear me out.
Uh,
One of the things that I think I consciously realized, if you look at my pin tweet on Twitter, it's a picture of my mom. And my mom passed away 2 years ago. And every time I go on Twitter, I see her face. And so any tweet that's under her, she's gonna see it. That's a reminder for me.
you got me. I'm gonna do that. I'm gonna do that. I'm gonna do that. Yeah. Thank you so much.
So what I'll say is, I mean, there's a way to reply without saying how you feel. I'll give a perfect example. There was a woman who just kept coming at me. This was maybe a couple years ago, when I knew what was going on behind the scenes with the Lakers and the Nets, with you know uh, Anthony Davis and Kyrie Irving, and the rumors that were going around about Kyrie's desire to be a Laker or not, and Russell Westbrook, and just conversations that I was having with people on both ends and knowing what was going on. And this woman just kept going and kept saying stuff, and I just kept seeing her name. So I looked at her profile picture, and she had a overbite for days. You hear me? So I'm gonna tell you how I replied. She kept going, she kept going, she kept going, she kept going. So I quote tweeted her and I said, "That's why you look like you could bite an apple through a picket fence." And then all of a sudden, it was like she started adding at the time the employer I worked for, he disrespected the woman, and then just started getting people to join in. In this instance, it had nothing to do with her being a woman because I kept ignoring her, and she kept going, she kept going, she kept going. But the thing is, anybody who knows me, like they would text me and laugh about it, was like, "Yo, she just kept going, she kept going, she kept going." The apple through the picket fence, like it was at the point I had enough. I didn't call her out her name. I didn't say no bees, no this, no that. All I said was that she could bite an apple through a picket fence. And she got mad. And she was like, "That's why your daddy likes it." Okay, you're just mad that I said what I said. So I think you can have fun with it, but I think you have to know when to respond and when to just ignore and when to block.
So now let's get into the nitty gritty, because now I got I got a couple questions for you, Scoop.
Okay.
When it comes to the Knicks,
Okay, that's where you going. Go ahead.
When it comes to the Knicks, I know you're a man who's been, behind the scenes. I'm not gonna ask you nothing too crazy, but over the past couple of years, can you tell us about the culture change specifically behind the scenes? Guys like Worldwide Wesley, Leon Rose, because I felt like a couple of years ago, I felt like we was going nowhere.
Mm-hmm.
And then Leon Rose comes in here. He was the head of CAA. He had to leave that position at CAA, and now he's the head of the New York Knicks, and he's been changing the New York Knicks for the past couple of years. But what are some of the things that, and you can know better than I can, but what are some of the things behind the scenes with the New York Knicks back in the day, even from the 2000s? Because I spoke about Isaiah Thomas with those New York Knicks, Stephon Marbury with Larry Brown, when Larry Brown was just playing players according to what city they was from, Antonio McDyess with his busted up knee, trading Patrick Ewing, and then going to sign this man for $100 million, Jerome James. You got Mike D'Antoni beefing with management back in the day. You got Carmelo Anthony saying, "I don't know if I want to resign." Then he resigns with a no trade clause. We traded Porzingis. What is the drastic difference that you see, like behind the scenes wise?
People actually wanting to play for the Knicks. I think that's the biggest thing. I think there was a period in time where there was this cloud, as you mentioned, and we don't have to revisit. I think you pretty much set the stage on that. I think there was just this cloud of not wanting to play. I also think that the belief of what the Knicks were going to get with Kyrie and Kevin Durant and even a Zion Williamson, and the alternate ending to that movie, was actually better than the one that everybody saw in real time. And it took time. Time is the operative word. I think that signing Julius Randle and playing in New York at a point when nobody else wanted to play, to me, mirrored when Amari Stoudemire came to this city and played. And then along came Carmelo Anthony, Chauncey Billups, Tyson Chandler, and others. I think this time around, nobody was expecting the Knicks' season to go as it did last season. And in fact, I feel like in 2021, people 21, 22, I think with Tibbs coming in, people were like happy, but I think it came out of nowhere. But it's like, okay, fine, you got the alternate ending that worked. Is Rush Hour 2 going to be better than Rush Hour 1? So if last season was Rush Hour 1, what does Rush Hour 2 look like? I think like I think that's so significant because now, if Julius Randle played the role of Juntao in Rush Hour 1, it's Carl Anthony Towns, Ricky Tan. Get your ass up right now. Let's go.
You might be Ricky Tan.
So in all seriousness though, I think that there's a lot of excitement, but this excitement seems more planned. Like there was a lot of Knicks fans that came out of the woodwork last year, but there were also some long-suffering Knicks fans that appreciated what they saw on the floor. I think Philly during last season played very much beneath their privilege because of injuries. But I also feel like that trade at the moves that were made at the deadline preserved them until Embiid came back. And I also think that in a fair and perfect world, if Randall was playing, I wonder if that series would have been more out of reach. I also know that with this Knicks team that's currently in the roster, I feel like people are excited about the screen and roll with Towns and with Brunson. But I do think that the thing that's interesting is the Knicks aren't a secret anymore. So now people are gunning for them. Like we know the Celtics are the champions. Cool. Everybody, there was a thought process that the Knicks and the Celtics, would play each other and that it would be the matchup of the century. And I feel like, the Pacers had other plans, and the Pacers have opened people's eyes. But the Knicks are not a secret anymore. I think that there is so much parity in the Eastern Conference. There's so much talent in the Eastern Conference, as is the Western Conference. But I just think that the Knicks are something to cheer for. They're exciting to watch, but they're not a secret anymore.
Definitely not a secret. I think that secret was done for last year in the playoffs with Jalen Brunson. When it comes to building a culture, how did this Karl Anthony Towns trade go down? They've been talking for years. They've been talking for years.
I mean,
what happened with Randall and the Knicks for them to get to this point? And does the Mitchell Robinson injury have anything to do with, in your opinion, with them trading for Cat?
I think in part the Mitchell Robinson injury had something to do with it, but I also think the Knicks ultimately did not have the space nor the ego in the locker room, like enough airspace to breathe in the locker room to contain everyone. And that's kind of it kind of reminds me of like when James Harden ultimately left Oklahoma to go to Houston and lived his best life on both the Isaiah Hartenstein side as well as the Julius Randle side. I think Julius will fit better in Minnesota because he is not around such a ball dominant guard in that particular system. It's not a knock on Brunson. The only problem is I think Brunson and Randall clash because they're both ball dominant as distributors in their own way. It kind of reminds me of Anthony Mason playing on a Miami Heat team next to Tim Hardaway. Anthony Mason had a all-star season that year, but Tim Hardaway was the primary ball handler in Miami. And that would work in a Knicks system where Ron Harper, or rather Derek Harper, is your point guard, but Tim Hardaway and Derek Harper are two different entities within their system. And so when I look at, Randall in Minnesota, Mike Conley has had experience playing with big personalities, albeit, Donovan Mitchell, albeit
Zach Randolph,
and Ant-Man as well. So I think that Minnesota also cakes off because even though you traded Towns, you still had Naz Reid waiting in the wing, and you still have Rudy Gobert defensively that is a stopper. I think that's a good problem to have. They had the space, but more importantly than anything else, this was probably one of the most talked about situations. If you're following the tea leaves with the Knicks over the years, to keep it back on the orange and blue, you look at the Knicks and you look at Leon Rose being Towns' former agent. You look at Tibbs being a former Timberwolves coach along with Cat, and you look at Wes and you look at all those other guys. I mean, this has been talked about for years. Just the right fit what didn't present itself. The other thing is, I know I caught hell back at the beginning of the year when I said that the Knicks were open to offers for Julius Randle. I can tell you that that was a conversation that was being had in James Dolan's office as far back as January and February, relating to what they were going to do with Julius Randle. And in fact, I can tell you that James Dolan asked many people their thoughts on whether Randle being traded elsewhere would make sense. And there were mixed reviews on that situation. The thing that kind of changed most of this was the fact that the Knicks were auditioning Randle to be traded, which is why him making an all-star team and more was part of that whole marketing thing because of perception. And ultimately, he was hurt, and they had to shelve those conversations until the right time to do so, which was the fall.
Wow. I got exactly what I needed from that. That's what you because reading the tea leaves, it's like, okay, Randall didn't resign yet. Once the season was done, they still talking about it. I'm like, yeah, he's not staying here. It's no way, because you don't want to go into your last season with this team that you built up yourself and you built up that locker room and going on the last year of your contract. I don't think that was like good on a locker room. With that said, you brought up James Dolan. Me personally, I think James Dolan is one of the best sports owners in sports history because of what he's done as far as hiring the most minorities since 2000. Doing certain things behind the scenes, like Tyson Chandler, his mother with the plane. His mother was sick, and he kept sending the private plane with that. Does James Dolan have more of a sway in the Knicks personnel decisions, or like you said, him and Leon Rose, they delegate to their peers and they ask around? Because a lot of people would say, oh, well, does he have a hand in this? I don't know. But do you think he's fell back from handling those type of duties and he's given everything to Leon Rose?
I think trust is based off of track record. And I think when that trust is earned, you go a little further in how much the people you work around trust you. I could give you a perfect example. I run in addition to what I do as a journalist, I run a media and marketing company, and you deal with people overseas, and they're trusting you to make sure that wires and things are done the right way. And because I have a track record, they know if I say I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this, and if I can't, I can't. And that's based off of a track record over the years of, working with people and then building that trust. And I think that goes back to, who you employ and who you work with. And so Leon Rose and William Wesley have earned the trust of James Dolan. I know in past years, maybe Dolan was a lot more heavy-handed. But I think in this instance, with this particular group of front office folks, the level of patience and going through the losses and going through the wins has paid dividends, and I think that there is more of a backseat approach that he has. But I'll add that ultimately he signs the checks, ultimately his organization, and he has to give his okay before they do. So I think that answers your question, but I think over time trust has been earned for them to make certain decisions on James Dolan's behalf.
Shouts to JD and the straight shots, man. Appreciate y'all. Scoop, another question. I'm trying to milk as much time as I can before I get you out of here. I try to get as much questions as I can, if I can get off.
Of course.
So, getting from the Knicks and just going to the NBA in its entirety, when do you see the NBA reload, like adding expansion teams, right? Do you see a team within the next 5 years relocating? The NBA absolutely needs 2 expansion teams. And my personal gripe with the NBA, I'm looking at Carmelo Anthony. Carmelo Anthony had 2 years of his career robbed because there was a lot of the media was on him, but at the same time, I felt like it wasn't enough teams in the NBA that could have needed his archetype and could have needed his services. DeMarcus Cousins, why is he not playing in the NBA? So go ahead.
Well, those are two separate things. You asked about the expansion, and then you asked about the playing styles, and I'll go with the playing styles first. I think Carmelo Anthony was ahead of his time. I think that Carmelo Anthony being ahead of his time signaled the byproduct of Paul George and being the complete player that he is, and why so many people, like a Brandon Miller, who shared with me that Paul George was his GOAT, and people, took it and ran with it.
Brandon Miller, crazy. He good though.
But all right, but ultimately, I understood where he was coming from. Just I think that the Paul George type of player is the prototype for today's NBA player, that predicates on pure scoring and swingmen being primary ball handlers, albeit a healthy LaMelo Ball. And so DeMarcus Cousins to me is the prototype for today's NBA big man that can stretch the floor. I feel like DeMarcus Cousins' skill set, um, Chris Webber walked so that DeMarcus Cousins and people like him could fly. And I think Derek Coleman was such a full force to be reckoned with that created the. I think Derek Coleman and Charles Barkley and their skill set created the Clarence Weatherspoons that created, the DeMarcus Cousinses and more. And now we have guys like Zion Williamson that can fly like a Zach LaVine and a Nate Robinson, but it also has broad shoulders like a LeBron. He's just an undersized center, in my opinion. Sean Kemp is also that prototype for a lot of today's NBA players also. But I think when you look at Carmelo Anthony, yeah, I mean, he playing in the Western Conference, you had to go against a San Antonio with Tim Duncan, and that team was still, relevant and looking to win more rings. And you're going against Kobe Bryant and the Lakers. So there's that. I think I answered that question. As far as the expansion teams, ultimately it's going to be Seattle and it's going to be Las Vegas. And I'll be more specific. Floyd Mayweather wants in on that. I sat with Floyd at his strip club in Vegas, and we met, we talked, and one of the things he said was he'd like to be part of an ownership group, and if that holds true, in my opinion, ultimately you may see a Rich Paul, who has built his reputation as being a premier NBA agent, and a respected confidant of players at some point, potentially thinking about life after being an agent and, creating an ownership group. I think that ownership group, along with Floyd Mayweather and LeBron James, would be ideal for a Vegas team. There was a report that came out the other day that suggested that the NBA would consider a franchise, an expansion team entering the NBA ranks by the 2027-2028 season. If that holds true, I would imagine that would be both Vegas and Seattle. You look at the impact of the Super Bowl earlier this year, Usher's impact with his concerts, and a myriad of other things in just Vegas, even the in-season championship. It's not a coincidence that was in Vegas, because the summer league is in Vegas and Vegas is a desired destination. So I think Vegas with Mayweather and Rich Paul and LeBron, at some point when LeBron retires, I could see all those guys being part of that. And on the Seattle side, Spencer Haywood has spoke reverently to me about just the desire of having another Seattle team in the building. And the Thunder unfortunately broke Seattle fans' hearts by going to Oklahoma. But let's not be mistaken. Oklahoma has created their own college adult atmosphere. You go to a game at that arena at Paycom Center, they got drummers on top of at the top of the stadium drumming while the game is going on. You got the fan base in unison when they don't sit down until the first point is scored, and the announcer goes, "You may now take your seats." You're in a situation where the Thunder have both the Seattle Sonics and the Oklahoma City's record book, and they're willing to relinquish that back to the Seattle area if Seattle gets a team, similarly to how Charlotte and New Orleans had their situation with the Hornets, and then the Hornets becoming, the Bobcats, and then ultimately becoming the Hornets, and the Pelicans becoming, leaving the Hornets name and becoming the Pelicans. So I think you're going to see some mirroring in that regard.
Yeah, hopefully, because I'm sick of certain NBA players who just deserves to be in the NBA, but I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
why is he not in the NBA? And then, just the media thing, that the outside perception of, oh, DeMarcus Cousins is a guy who's uncoachable, or Carmelo Anthony, he's a guy who's uncoachable. It's just certain stuff I just don't believe. I just felt
Mm-hmm.
like it wasn't enough space in the NBA for these guys. It's not enough roles for everybody.
Mm-hmm.
With that said, Scoop, my final question, and when it comes to the NBA as a whole, give me 3 players who you think will be on the move within the next 3 years. And I want to throw one player at you who it just screams at me, this guy's not finishing his career there. LaMelo Ball. He ain't going one of those 21, 8-8. Love his play style, love what he could do. But he's one of those guys I look at and I say within the next 3 years, yeah, he's gonna ask out. So 3 players out the box, you look at their situation, you like, yeah, he might ask out. So
Um, hmm. You just want stars or superstar? How do you want me to scale that?
you could scale it to all-star, star, superstar, not necessary, or fringe all-star.
Okay, I'll give you three names, just that are a combination of all three.
Mhm.
Um, Luka Doncic.
Oof. That's I don't see a planet where no, I can't say that because in today's NBA, anybody could get traded. I don't
Mm-hmm.
I don't see I don't see a planet where Mark Cuban signs off on a Luca trade, but he's not Luca.
Well, Mark Cuban, respectfully, and I know Mark Cuban, is not the owner. He is part of the brain trust that is part of that transition.
Mhm.
But there's a new ownership group in Dallas in place, and I think that bringing in Kyrie Irving was a great start, as well as bringing in Klay Thompson in the offseason. But I'm interested. I think me saying that is contingent upon what they do this season within the next 2 seasons. Because I think that when you look at Dirk Nowitzki and Kobe Bryant and Tim Duncan, those guys were part of that last hurrah post Jordan era of guys who stayed on one team. And Kobe almost was moved a couple times.
Yeah,
Um,
to the
so when you
Bulls.
look at and the Mavs, and so when you look at Luca, I think there's just this belief that um, Dirk stayed his whole time and he's going to mirror Dirk. While that could be true, I think what they do in the next couple of years will dictate how they continue their run in the future. And so that's a name that sticks out to me. A name that I think a star or a guy that gets paid like a star that could be on the move. I think is one in Kyle Kuzma of the Washington Wizards. I think he's in a good situation because both he and Jordan Poole have won championships at a very young age, and so they're enjoying the process of just being leaders on a team, being OGs on a team after being young guys on veteran teams, on the Warriors and the Lakers, respectively. But Kuzma was a guy that was almost moved at the deadline. The Mavs, as well as the Sacramento Kings, were both interested in his services, as widely reported it at the beginning of this season, and ultimately he decided to stay in Washington. And he's in a good situation in Washington because he does a ton of philanthropic work wherever he goes, whether that's LA, whether that's his home town of Flint, Michigan, as well as the Washington D.C. area that can use his star power and more. But I think there's going to get to be a point where you dislike losing all the time, and you want to, see other things and see greener pastures. So that's a name that kind of sticks out to me at first thought, top of mind. You want a third guy. Um, uh, third guy. I wonder if Joel Embiid ultimately stays. Like at some point,
Mm.
at a later point, he goes somewhere else. That's the first guy that comes to mind. Um, I think Jimmy Butler ultimately stays in Miami. I don't think he moves. I think he's going to get what he wants. But those are the three that come to mind at just right now.
That's good, man. Those three names, yeah, those are guys who I've seen in the past couple of years who've been tied to like trade rumors and stuff of that nature. I'm so happy that the Knicks have gotten past that part of their building their culture, and now they're at the part where they're being championship contenders. With that said, Scoop, man, yo, thank you so much, man. This is like I wanted to make sure I respect your time, but this is such an honor to have you on my platform, man, and give you a time of day, man. Especially, another black African American like myself who's actually in that business, who's actually in that field, who's in these locker rooms, who's talking to these players, man. So salute to you, man. I really appreciate it.
Thanks
To
for
the
having
Knick
me.
fans who tuned in today. I appreciate y'all too. I see y'all in the chat. I see y'all going crazy, man. Thank you, IKBM. With that said, Scoop, what do you have coming up soon? Once again, thank you, brother, for coming on to my show. But what do you have coming up soon? Do you have any interviews coming up soon? Where can the people find you? And yeah, thank you once again. Nothing but thank yous, brother.
Brother, thank you for the opportunity to be myself. Quickly, follow me on Twitter at Scoop B. Follow me on Instagram at Scoop B. We just dropped an interview today with Basketball Hall of Famer Nancy Lieberman. We talked about a myriad of different topics there. Currently, we are running through the end of the month an interview series called Scoop B Selects. Last week, we dropped one with Swish Parker. This week, we dropped with Nancy Lieberman, but also Scoop B Radio, my media platform, is available on all streaming platforms, Apple Podcasts. You can visit scoopb.com to kind of read the written portion of our interviews. You can subscribe to my YouTube channel at Scoop B TV. And yeah, man, we're just making things happen and having fun while doing it. And again, thank you, brother, for the opportunity to be myself.
Yo, anytime, man. I pride myself on being myself. As you can see, I'm trying to mature. I'm trying to not curse people out on the timeline no more. I'm trying to keep it cordial,
Of
right?
course. Of
But
course.
that one thing you said, that's going to stay with me, and I'm definitely going to do that when I get a chance today. Matter of fact, within the next 10 minutes. My
Okay.
father passed away this year, right? He
I'm
passed
sorry.
away.
My condolences.
Thank you. And he passed away 2 days after my 34th birthday, January 27th.
Wow.
So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a pin picture of my father on my Twitter. So each time I get into an argument, I can just scroll down, I see his face. What the hell are you saying that for, bro? And maybe, maybe that calm me down, man. So thank you for that. Thank you for that, man.
My pleasure.
That's a blessing, man.
My pleasure.
Thank you, man. Knick fans, I appreciate y'all. I appreciate everybody for tuning in. It's your boy, State of New York Knick Podcast with Scoop B. Scoop B. Listen, this pod to be out. Give it about like a couple hours. I'm gonna release the pod in a couple hours. But thank you, Scoop B, once again. Thank you, Knick fans, once again. I love you guys, man. Knick fans, y'all be safe. Y'all be blessed. We out of here. Peace and blessings to everybody. Y'all have a blessed day. Scoop, you have a blessed day as well, my brother.
My man.